Good evening and welcome to the Somerville Redevelopment Authority meeting of May 13th. My name is Phil Ercolini. I'm Chair of the Somerville Redevelopment Authority, and I call this meeting to order at 5:35 p.m. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this public meeting of the SRA is being conducted by remote participation. This session will be recorded and will be a public record, and I will now ask board members to confirm they are in attendance, and I'll do so in alphabetical order. Awana Bonnie.
Here.
Courtney Brunson.
Here.
Ben Ewan Campen.
Here.
William Gage. You're muted, Bill, but I see him there. You're muted. Patrick McCormick.
Here.
Christine Stone.
Here.
And myself, Phil Ercolini, are in attendance, so we do have a quorum. So I'll now ask the city staff to present a few of the house rules about using the technology. Ben?
Shit.
That wasn't
Sorry.
recorded.
Sorry.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben Demers. I'm a senior economic development planner with the city, and I serve as staff to the Somerville Redevelopment Authority, or the SRA as we'll refer to it this evening. I just want to note that when an agenda item is being presented this evening, any presentation materials that staff have received ahead of time will be displayed on the screen. And if participants wish to direct the board's attention to any specific page, they should verbally note which page staff should show on the screen and should verbally explain to the board what is being shown. Please also note that this meeting is being conducted remotely using Zoom webinar. In order to comply with the state's open meeting law, which doesn't allow for what is called side conversation, so conversation outside of the kind of main conversation of the meeting, the chat function amongst attendees has been disabled. If you as an attendee have a question or would like to make a comment on any of the matters discussed tonight, please use the raise hand function in Zoom to indicate that you would like to speak. I will unmute participants one by one and give you 2 minutes to speak. When it is your turn, please clearly state your name and address before saying anything else. After 2 minutes, I'll then mute your microphone. Please remember that any questions this evening asked by attendees will be a part of the open record. And I'll now pass things over to the SRA's Special Counsel, Catherine Lester-Salkert.
Thanks, Ben. Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Lester-Salkert. I serve as special counsel to the SRA. I just want to remind all board members that all votes must be roll call votes. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, so let's getting right into the agenda. The first item number 1, is approval of the minutes of the April 22nd, 2025 general meeting. Did all members have an opportunity to review the minutes? Any errors or amendments to that? I don't see any. Okay, so then I will entertain a motion to approve. Mr. Gage makes a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Courtney Brunson seconds. We'll do a roll call vote. Awana Bonnie.
Yes.
Courtney Brunson.
Yes.
Ben Ewan Campen.
Yes.
William Gage.
Yes.
Patrick McCormick.
Yes.
Christine Stone.
Yes.
And myself, Phil Ercolini, have voted to approve the minutes of April 22nd, 2025. The next item on the agenda is the public comment period. Ben, anyone in the audience who wishes to address the SRA at this point?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are no members of the public in attendance currently.
Okay. All right, then next item on the agenda is item number 3, which is the Union Square revitalization plan. And item number A is an update regarding MassDOT's improvements to Webster Avenue Bridge adjacent to the disposition parcel D4-.3. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to just quickly introduce this item before I pass things over to Director Rawson. Just give me 1 second to pull up slides. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. One second. Okay. So we're going to start off this evening with a couple of items related to implementation of the Union Square Revitalization Plan. The first is going to be a short presentation from the city's Director of Mobility, Brad Rawson, in response to a question asked by Councilor Ewan Campbell ahead of the meeting. And then the second is going to be a return to an item from last week's agenda. So a request for approval for an activity and use limitation over the Lot 5 portion of what is called the D2 block in Union Square. And we're joined this evening by a licensed site professional who's worked with US2 on the remediation work at D2, Tricia Pinto, to answer questions that came up and then any others that SRA members might have. I do want to just make a quick note. So Greg Karcheski from US2, who often speaks on matters related to Union Square, is not here this evening. He had a meeting with the neighborhood council that I didn't want to ask him to move, but he will be with us next month to kind of have our regular update around Union Square. So just to really quickly introduce some of the Webster Ave bridge work. So context for this area, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, or MassDOT, is replacing the Webster Ave bridge over the MBTA tracks. Director Rawson will give a little bit more context on this. This work is directly adjacent to the D4.3 parcel within the Union Square Revitalization Plan. So you'll note here on the screen, the D4.3 parcel, also the D4.2 parcel across the street. And then the bridge is at this intersection here of Webster Ave and Newton Street. So just to give some context of, this is infrastructure work kind of adjacent to some of the disposition parcels related to this work. So obviously relevant to the conversations that we have here with the SRA. I'm going to pass things over to Director Rawson to, well, actually, I guess one other piece of context. So within the Mass DOT work, the plans that Director Rawson will talk more about are showing kind of a slight shift in the direction of the street, which is cutting into the D4.3 parcel. And this was shown at a presentation by Mass DOT a few months ago, which I believe is what had triggered the question from Councilor Ewan Campbell. So this is what Director Rawson will talk more about. And then Councilor Ewan Campbell, if you have kind of follow-up questions or specific concerns, this is a great space to talk through that. So I'll pass things over to Brad.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, SRA members. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you this evening. My name is Brad Rawson. I serve our city as Director of Mobility in OSPCD. I'm a Somerville resident and a 17-and-a-half-year veteran of our great administration and organization. Really appreciate all of your hard work over the years to steward the objectives of our community-wide planning, our neighborhood and district planning. And Chair, as I think about the image on the screen in front of us, I'm really thinking about going back all the way to 2012, when many of us and our predecessors worked on the original revitalization plan for Union Square, and 2015, when we and our predecessors and community members worked on the Union Square and Boynton Yards neighborhood plans. Both of those community planning documents really called on us to link public infrastructure investment with responsible, equitable, transit-oriented development. And I think we all collectively have done a really good job of honoring that vision and that spirit. So as you may know, members, the city has been working on planning and designing and financing safe, multimodal, accessible streetscapes in and around the Webster Avenue corridor for many, many years. Long before we learned that the Webster Avenue rail bridge was kind of moving up Mass DOT's statewide prioritization process. So fortunately, the city had been investing our own resources in community engagement and in technical engineering work to envision the future of the very difficult, inaccessible, and unsafe intersection of Prospect, Webster, and Newton Concord, for example. So a couple of years back, Mass DOT reached out to us and they said, no surprise, just like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of state-owned bridges around the Commonwealth, we, Mass DOT, have been evaluating the Webster Ave Bridge, and surprise, surprise, it's 120 years old. We've determined that it is rapidly becoming structurally deficient. We're going to work on replacing it. And so right away, the city was able to point back to all of those community processes and the formal policy and design efforts and say, look, this is Somerville. We really do expect our state agency partners not only to take care of their assets, but when they repair them, to do more than just repair them as they were. Because these state sidewalks are inaccessible and unsafe, These streets don't work for people walking, wheeling, biking, or catching the bus. Let's make sure that we plan holistically for the future of this corridor. And to Mass DOT's credit, Chair, they listened, and they've actually taken meetings with our staff. They've developed designs that do more than replace the bridge as it currently is. And we're super excited about that. So as you noted, Chair, a couple of months ago, Mass DOT provided a public update on this bridge development process. Let me just give you a couple of quick elements of scope for any of you who were not at that meeting. So this is a major piece of reconstruction, $30+ million bridge. Mass DOT is planning to initiate the construction in spring of 2027. So we still have about 18 months ahead before things really get serious with a contractor under contract and submitting real traffic management plans and real public communications for real impacts. Between now and then, DOT will be refining its designs very, very quickly. And so the current designs that have been shared with the city and with the public show some really encouraging signs. So thank you, Ben. This is a perfect image. Anybody who was at the meeting or watched the video recording, which is up on the web, may see this as familiar. Just to orient you, on the left side of this image is the big intersection of Prospect and Webster and Concord, which would be just off the screen on the far left. In the middle of the image is what we call Big Newton on the top of the image and Little Newton on the bottom. You can see the big Eversource transformer as that kind of big, strange looking thing in the middle bottom of the image. And to the right of the image is actually headed north up towards Prospect Hill Charter Academy and the heart of Union Square. So one thing that it's worth pointing out, the city and our community members have always said Webster and Newton is a really unsafe and uncomfortable intersection because of the skewed nature of their intersection. And so we asked Mass DOT early in our coordination if they would work with us to bend Newton away and create two 90-degree safe pedestrian-friendly intersections. And that is what they are doing. This is really, really exciting. And yet, getting to the point of your agenda item, I think, Chair, there could be potential private property impacts associated with that. And so we just want to name this nice and early. On the top of the image where Big Newton reaches Webster, the current concept in this drawing shows an impact on the D4.3 site, which we all have been working really hard on, none more so than our Economic Development Division, our Housing Division, and all of you. So I think it's really important to just say, Chair, that the city noticed this. We said, thank you, Mass DOT, for listening and trying to make this a safer intersection. Now we would like you to go one step further and narrow up that street a bit more to minimize or eliminate any impacts to the privately owned property that we call D4.3 under the Urban Renewal Plan in order to maximize and preserve flexibility for the affordable housing joint venture that we all have been working on. So this kind of brings us up to the current moment, Chair, and I'll stop talking in a moment and be happy to answer questions as best I can. DOT's design is not yet complete. They are currently reviewing comments that the city and many other folks have contributed to them. They have committed verbally and in public that they will shrink that street and work to minimize or eliminate private property impacts. But we don't know exactly what that it will entail. Are we going to save 5 feet? Are we going to save 10 feet? We have done some test fits with our partners in the public-private partnership for redevelopment. And we're trying to make sure that we understand where building footprints and foundations are envisioned on the D4.3 site. And again, try to get curb lines and accessible sidewalks to not impact those building foundations. But we don't have every detail of information quite yet. We hope to in the next month or two. So we would definitely happy to be, taking a homework assignment from this meeting and update you all as soon as we get new and additional information. But yeah, I hope that's a helpful 5-minute summary of kind of how we got here, how the city is structuring our partnership with Mass DOT, MBTA, and others to really honor the intent of the Urban Renewal Plan, the Neighborhood Plan, and all the hard work that US2, POA, SCC, Neighborhood Council, and SRA, everybody has been doing together to try to get a great deed restricted permanently affordable housing site at the D4.3 location. So why don't I stop, Chair? And if it's okay, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Brad. And I think initially I'm going to defer to Ben Ewan Campen, who's the counselor from that district, and he has some questions appropriate, I think, to this bridge work. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, thank you very much, Director. I appreciate it. I think, ultimately the question I have is just, is this going to reduce the amount of affordable units we have? And I know it sounds like we're not really in a position to get the answer to that, but that's the question I have. I obviously understand and support making those intersections safer, and that's my question. It's not really about the mobility. I will say, unrelated to the SRA stuff, I really don't like the idea of coming out of Union Square and having to switch sides for the bike lane. That seems insane to me. I hope that you're giving them that feedback, but that's not really germane to the SRA stuff. So thank you for that update. It sounds like it's going to, possibly reduce the size of that lot a little bit. And, at some point, I would like to know the answer of what impact is going to be on the number of units.
Thanks, Ben. And any other members have any questions of Brad at this point? I know
Mr. Chair.
we're early on in the process, but go ahead.
So through Mr. Chair to Councilor Campin, just to comment on that quickly, and I don't want to speak too much. So context I should have given at the beginning, which Director Rawson has referenced. So this site is being developed. It's a partnership between US2, who is the master developer of the revitalization plan area, and then Preservation of Affordable Housing, POA, a large affordable housing developer in the area, and then also Somerville Community Corporation, SCC. So we have had conversations with POA about, how would you adjust if this parcel got smaller? Their initial response at the time, and I don't want to hold them to this because there's much more planning that's going to happen. But they essentially said they'd looked at scenarios and they would, sorry, there's sirens going by. They would plan to not reduce the number of units. There is potential that they would need to make some of the units that are near this intersection smaller. So it might reduce some of the 2 and 3 bedrooms to fewer bedroom counts, which is obviously not something that we ever want to see. But that has been their sort of initial response. They would aim to probably try to keep the same number of units. So that's been their very early response. I think POA has yet to attend one of these meetings. We're a little early in that part of the planning process, but it can also be something that they address when they do eventually attend one of these redevelopment authority meetings.
Ben, are there any limitations on the height if they had to reduce the size of the lot? Could they go up to consider more units?
Through Mr. Chair, I am not aware of, from my understanding, they are currently planning to build to the maximum amount allowed under zoning. So I'm not sure if they could go up or what the route would be for that. I could ask them that question though.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my concern is when they begin to not eliminate, but reduce the number of family units, I get a little troubled, we've got enough 1 and 2 bedroom units in the city. We need a little bit more than that. So anyway, just a consideration. Any other questions from members at this point in time? Christine?
Hi, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. And I don't know if this question is directed to you, Brad, or Ben Demers, but we've focused the conversation thus far on the top intersection, if you will, the large Newton intersection, and I don't think you discussed the intersection on the bottom half of in the photo. I noticed that intersection is getting wider than what's there today. Is there any impact on SRA land on that side of the road? So like the lower part.
Chair,
In
through
the-
you, but perhaps I can take the first answer and then ask Ben or Rachel to chime in as well. Thank you for that question. And sorry, I didn't focus on that as well, but yes, it's a good read of the plan view. The current concept does bend Little Newton Street across the old abandoned site at 32 Webster. Again, this is kind of an advanced concept. This is not a final design. The city has provided the same feedback to the Mass DOT team that even though that 32 Webster site is not part of the D parcel, we do have every expectation that redevelopment ultimately will be planned, permitted, and constructed. And so we do want to preserve maximum flexibility there as well. So there's not as much specificity in terms of the test fits that we've done at this time. But yes, similar dynamic is something that we will be managing and monitoring going forward.
And to add through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Stone, so sorry, my cursor is not showing up greatly. This section that is created here is not, so like this land here, from my understanding, is not a disposition parcel. So Brad was noting 32 Webster, which
Okay.
here is in like the bottom right corner of this intersection, like the northwest corner, if you were to flip this. This parcel over here covered in cars, this is D4.2, so this is a disposition parcel, and D4.1 is further up here, but from my understanding, this land that is being added here is not adding on to an existing SRA parcel.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from members?
Yes, through
Go ahead,
you,
Brad.
Mr. Chair, just what's the, to Director Russell, what's, I know this is early, in the process, what would you say is the overall timeline and next steps and milestones?
Chair, through you, thanks for the question. So current schedule that Mass DOT is managing toward would anticipate finishing up design and permitting approximately 1 year from now in the middle of calendar 26, and then moving into a competitive bidding process. It takes, 3 to 6 months. So in the second half of calendar 26, they're out to bid. They're getting a general contractor lined up, and that general contractor then is spending the winter on preparations, ordered material, organizing labor crews, getting permits, working with the MBTA, which will be an interesting process. And the shovels are intended to hit the ground in earnest in spring of 2027. And Chair, I'm sorry, I didn't complete the thought. Currently, Mass DOT is assuring us and the public that this would be a 1-year push, meaning, one heavy impact construction season. Early commentary from the city was interested in figuring out whether we could preserve one direction of multimodal travel across the bridge. The answer is no. Structural characteristics of the bridge do not permit them to do that. And so we will have a bridge that is out of service in one of our busiest neighborhoods for a year. So then a whole different part of the city's response framework with our DPW teams, fire and public safety, traffic engineering, and others, work to make sure that we can live safely through the construction impacts. We've done this through various phases of the Green Line extension. We're not eager to do it again, but we know the questions to ask and how to coordinate that sort of work.
Brad.
Thanks.
Any other questions from members of Brad at this point? No? Okay. All right, seeing.
Chair, may I offer one quick thing to a question that was raised a moment ago? Ben Demers mentioned the D4.2 site that is visible on the left side of your image. It is not germane directly to the Webster Avenue Bridge question. However, I do want to call members' attention to the fact that the city's official 25% design for our streetscape and plaza project do call to bend Webster Avenue towards Prospect Street for all of the same reasons I described a minute ago, creating slow, safe intersections that focus on pedestrian accessibility. And the current concepts that we have drawn up do show that the new right-of-way would go across what is now privately owned property at D4.2. So that is not an active workflow on our side right now. But since this image is on the screen, I thought it was a good opportunity to make sure that SRA members kind of had that in their long view. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Any further comments from members? Okay, seeing none then. The next item is item number B.
I
which
think
is a-
Patrick, did you have a question or comment? Sorry, I don't know if you didn't put your hand
I
out.
think he kept that up there. I think he already, did you, Patrick?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No, thanks. I was just slow in lowering my hand.
Okay, you're forgiven. Okay, so the next item is Pod B, request for a vote to approve an activity and use limitation for lot 5 of the D2 parcel.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to give some quick context to this before I hand things over to Tricia to answer any questions. Yeah. Okay, so for the second Union Square item, we're going to be returning to the discussion. A lot of sirens going by this evening. returning to the discussion of the activity and use limitations, or the AUL, that we brought up last month. So general context for anyone tuning in, US2, the master developer of the Union Square Revitalization Plan area, as part of their work remediating and redeveloping what is called the D2 or Disposition 2 parcel. They're looking to record an activity and use limitation for Lot 5, which is the one remaining portion of the D2 block that is owned by the Redevelopment Authority. So this intersection here showing Somerville Ave and Prospect Street. This on the corner is 10 Prospect, which is the large black commercial building in Union Square. And kind of in the lower part of the image here is 20 Prospect, which is the wraparound residential, and then just kind of below the map here would be the tower. So in general, staff have reviewed the AUL, and some of the context we discussed last time. The goal of the AUL, as the name suggests, it as part of remediation work, it kind of notes going forward any limitations on any activities or use that would be hosted at the site. And so we walked through some of the kind of the takeaway points of the AUL. So it notes that single-family residential and agricultural uses still shouldn't be allowed without a plan from a licensed site professional, who's someone who kind of helps understand the parameters of remediation work and what is safe. It also notes that any portion of the building intended for use as a school, daycare, nursery school, or playground must be located above a lower building level or open airspace. So these are just kind of some things to keep in mind as we think about future redevelopment of this parcel, which we don't have a super active conversation about right now. I will note, going back to the previous map, the city owns the adjacent parcels at 9 to 11 Allen Street. So there will be likely conversations in the future about sort of what this joint redevelopment looks like. We're just not there in the planning process for Union Square right now. So I want to kind of come back to some of the questions that were asked last time. And I want to, if members are comfortable, we will ask for a vote to approve the language. One of the questions that was asked last time by member Stone was why we are doing this now rather than, is it something that we could record at the time of actually redeveloping the parcel? Like, is there anything that this kind of holds us to that we would have any concerns about? And so, as I mentioned, we have Trisha Pinto here, who works with US2 as a licensed site professional at this site. Trisha, I was hoping you could open by answering that question, and then we could also open it to any other questions from SRA members.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Ben. Again, I'm Trisha Pinto. I'm a senior vice president with Sanborn Head and Associates and also a licensed site professional in Massachusetts. And I have been working with the US2 team now for many years on bringing the D2 block into environmental compliance and regulatory closure. Really under two programs, the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, which is the Massachusetts DEP set of regulations for cleaning up contaminated sites, and also under TSCA, which is administered by the US EPA at the federal level. And so just by way of background, which will get me to answering the question of why do this now. So really, this kind of represents the endpoint culmination of many, many years of environmental remediation and cleanup at the D2 block, which actually started with the city and the SRA working even before US2 came in and took title to do remediation of the former Kylie Barrel facility. So Lot 5 is a portion of what was formerly known as the Kylie Barrel facility, which was a barrel refurbishing facility and resulted in a significant amount of contamination at the parcel. And so we've come a long way, I will say, in terms of getting to this point. And we are now at the point of achieving a regulatory endpoint under both the DEP program, the Massachusetts program, and also under the US EPA TSCA program. And so what this represents is really the fact that we have now gotten to the point where we no longer need to continue monitoring at the sites. We've attained the data necessary to demonstrate that we can close out this regulatory matter for the former Kylie Barrel facility, both within the context of state and federal regulations. So the AUL is required because the remediation that was done initially actually by the city working under their EPA TSCA approval and under the MCP required some excavation at Lot 5. And ultimately a 3-foot clean cap was placed on the Lot 5 parcel. That was all done under an approval from the EPA and under the appropriate MCP documents. That EPA approval requires that as an endpoint, an AUL be recorded as sort of the last step because there is residual contamination deeper than 3 feet at the parcel. So the AUL is required now for 2 reasons. One is that it's required to sort of address that EPA obligation that is in place with the original approval that was obtained by the city for Kylie Barrel, which includes Lot 5. And also because we're now at a point to demonstrate we've achieved a permanent solution, which is a regulatory endpoint under the Massachusetts regulations. So essentially at this point, we've reached closure. And the last step before being able to close this out from a regulatory viewpoint is the recording of the activity and use limitation. So essentially we've sort of waited as long as we could to record the AUL. And in part, that's what certainly was facilitated the redevelopment that's happened. But we're now at a regulatory endpoint where this needs to be recorded.
Before I open it up to questions, I did just a question of my own. Beyond the parameters of that particular lot, after the testing and the remediation that occurred, was there any indication that any of that might have leached out into other lots in that area?
Yeah, sure. So a big part of the work that needs to be done when you're assessing cleanup is looking at migration. So really understanding the nature and extent of contamination. You will see that if you can see the dotted hatch that kind of covers most of the figure that's being shown, that's the extent of the Kylie Barrel site. So what that means is that some of the releases that occurred on the Kylie Barrel site, which is more to the left in this figure, actually did migrate to the right on this figure towards, for instance, the 9 and 11 Allen Street parcels. That was actually something that was documented back when the city was doing the remediation work initially. And so that required monitoring at those parcels along Allen Street, which was initially done by the city, and then US2 took that over when they took title to the properties. And basically the monitoring has continued until the point now where the concentrations have decreased enough that we are at a closure point. So yes, that migration has been assessed. It did migrate onto those Allen Street properties, but now the data demonstrate that we have reached closure.
Thank you, Tricia. Any members, any questions of Tricia at this point? I don't see any hands, so I'm assuming, Courtney, go ahead.
I'm wondering if you can go back to the previous slide in part because this is Tricia when I am relying on your expertise of what's industry standard, but I'm specifically looking at the second bullet and really just have a question about whether or not a lower building level or open airspace for any of those school, daycare, nursery, or any places that will have children is like industry standard for what we would consider appropriate for this type of remediation.
Yeah, so I will say that second bullet is something that the EPA specifically requested be included in the AUL. So they've already reviewed it. And that was a specific item they were looking for, largely around the fact that there's residual, what are called PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls in the soil. So I would say that's it's certainly appropriate in terms of making sure we're not posing any sort of risk to a future daycare or school or anything like that. And it's something that the EPA specifically requested be in the document.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Christine, go ahead. You had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe Ben Demers or Rachel can answer this. I recall in our last meeting, you might have touched on the fact the city has thought about, or the city staff has thought about what development options are available on this site, but haven't progressed those too far. And I wondered if you could just speak about that. The reason I ask is when you look, I guess, to the east of the 10 and 20 Prospect, you see a neighborhood of triple deckers and two families. And I would think that this site, the highest and best use absent this environmental issue, is just that, right? It's some sort of a townhouse, triple decker type use. I don't know, but now we're saying with this AUL, that is prohibited. So yeah, could Ben or Rachel speak about redevelopment potential here, if you've thought about that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Stone. Right, so the conversations that have been had, at least that I've been a part of, about redevelopment in this area, primarily it's that given that the SRA retains ownership of this lot and the city owns parcels directly next door, which I don't know if these are qualified as single family homes or the number of units in the two structures here. They might be single family or two family homes. Just given the proximity of these parcels, it's more that the conversations have been, there's kind of a natural possibility of development here, of combining these parcels and developing at a slightly higher scale, certainly higher than a single family home that's restricted by the AUL. The directly adjacent, there is a development that is occurring, and then further down the parcel is a site that is, I believe, owned by Cass. So nothing really has been kind of put in stone or kind of set in concrete about what would be developed in this area, and there would need to be much more discussion and kind of community process about what this would ever be redeveloped into. So really the conversation, from my understanding, has been as far as it's kind of natural that these sites will likely be redeveloped together at some point, but it hasn't gone significantly beyond that. Rachel, I don't know if there's any additional context you want to add to that.
I think Ben, you did a great job. I think what we've been thinking about is that most likely, am I not coming through?
Yeah, you are now.
Okay, sorry about that. It's the headphones.
No, it's okay.
You know, anything that we would be talking about here, we would probably be looking at addressing this residual circumstance at that time, because you're dealing, I think what's the difference with the and again, I'll turn, but single family homes can be built slab on grade to address the residual contamination as a natural part of your process, right? And I think that's part of what we're looking at here, is that we would be looking at something where we're addressing it. But again, we don't know what that looks like yet at all.
Can you just, Ben, or go back in one slide so we can look at what does the AUL prevent? Okay, so single family residential. Okay. So Trisha, if there were a redevelopment of, say, townhomes or some sort of multi-family product developed on the site, is that allowed under this AUL language?
Yes, it is. That is specifically listed out as a permitted use, multifamily residential. So what's prohibited here is single family residential. I would add too, I think this might have been what Rachel was getting at. Even after the AUL is recorded, you would always have an option to remediate and revise the AUL, right, in a development scenario. So it's not, you could do additional remediation to then allow the single family residential if that was, made sense to do. So you're not like locked in, I guess is what I would say. You would always have that as an opportunity if you chose to do that.
Yeah.
I would say in general, AULs are pretty common in urban areas. And so I think a lot of developers who are used to developing in urban areas would be used to working with an AUL like this. And it certainly allows sort of as much flexibility as we could, but also considering needing to be protective of the residual contamination that remains.
And I guess, Mr. Chair, if I can, one more
Sure,
question.
yes, yes.
That I think is kind of my question about and why I had asked about an AUL now. Because my understanding is there are two options. You either can clean up the site or you can clean it up to a point and then execute an AUL, or have an AUL on the site. And I guess I'm not trying to put more on the US2 obligations, and someone might tell me there's a agreement out there that says they don't have to do this, but that was really my point. Why not clean it up now to a residential use rather than put an AUL on it and then clean it up? If I guess single family uses probably isn't applicable in this area. I guess where I'm going with this was why not continue to clean up and your closeout is full cleanup. Your regulatory endpoint would be complete cleanup so that there are no use limitations on the site.
Well, I will say that the original approach that the city took with addressing the contamination initially and the approval they obtained from the EPA always contemplated that it wouldn't be cleaned up to single family residential use.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Okay.
So that that approval is based on the assumption that it wouldn't be cleaned up to that extent.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Christine. Any further questions of Tricia at this point? Catherine?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just have one quick question, Tricia, and it may not apply to this AUL. It could be the 9 to 11 that we're having to do. But the requirement to name a project manager when there are but there's no active monitoring that has to go on. Could you just explain what's required?
Sure. So that is specific to Lot 5 only, and that is
Okay.
a specific requirement because of the TSCA obligations. So the 9 and 11 Allen Street is not subject to TSCA. So that's
Okay.
why it doesn't apply there. And essentially that's an EPA requirement because there is residual contamination, that there is a project or program manager. The intent there is really to just make sure there's someone who is knowledgeable of the day-to-day activity at the site. And I know this is a vacant lot, so not a lot of activity, right? But
Yeah.
someone who you can identify who will know if a project is planned.
Got
So
it.
that
That's what I thought. Yeah.
that person can say, time out. There's things here we need to talk about before we put a shovel in the ground. That's the intent.
Got it.
Obviously, it's a little more elaborate for like the D2.1 and D2.2 buildings where they're active and they might have, like a small utility project or something going on. But here where it's a vacant lot, it's really just to identify someone who's going to be aware of the obligations and be able to stop and plan before a shovel goes in the ground.
Very good. That's what I thought, but I wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Tricia, just for my edification, what is TSCA? What is that?
Yeah.
acronym?
Great question. Is the Toxic Substances Control Act. It was enacted late 70s,
Is that
and it would.
federal? Is that
Yes, that is
federal?
the federal. So that's why this is US EPA instead of Mass DEP. Although Mass DEP also, so TSCA is very specific to some specific chemicals. And the most common is polychlorinated biphenyls. So PCBs, you might find them in a transformer. You can find them in a lot of spaces. And so EPA's purview here is very focused on one contaminant, whereas DEP's purview focuses on all the contaminants. But together, we've had meetings with both entities together, so they're working in cooperation on sort of the overall closure for this site.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
And
Sure.
The EPA is always, the PCBs are always the purview of the EPA, correct? They always, right? And they
Yeah.
have their specific requirements. that
Yeah.
they have to go through in order to satisfy.
That's right. PCBs are also regulated by Mass DEP, but they tend to always default to the TSCA regulations. You have to meet both, and the TSCA regulations tend to be a little more prescriptive.
Thank you, Tricia. So any other comments or questions of Tricia at this point? Okay. Go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. The one thing I do want to address after Kathy's question. So the vote language that I will bring up in a moment, it will essentially reference that we are asking the SRA to essentially empower staff to name a program manager within this without getting into too much detail on that right now. It will likely almost certainly be some combination of like the SRA email, myself, who is the liaison, but using the SRA email likely because again, with the considerations of staff turnover over time. But then also there is a position within the Inspectional Services Department of the city that specifically manages AULs. And so they would be brought in on kind of having that expertise. And so some combination of those names will be kind of named as the program manager for this.
Okay. No problems with that, members? All right, Ben, so do we have something before us in the language that we can approve, or how do we?
We
want to
do.
Okay.
Let me share screen again just to show some drafted language, and we can make any tweaks if necessary. So the language that I drafted ahead would be to ask the chair to request a motion in a second to approve an activity and use limitation document prepared by Union Square Station Associates or US2 for the Lot 5 portion of Disposition Parcel 2 or D2 in the Union Square Revitalization Plan area, and to request that city staff on behalf of the SRA name an appropriate project manager for the monitoring and maintenance plan outlined for Lot 5 in the final version of the AUL, and to authorize Chair Galini as chair of the Somerville Redevelopment Authority to sign the AUL following the notice period.
Hey, members, any questions or concerns about the language? I see none. I don't see everybody, but I'm assuming none, no one. All right, I will entertain.
I do have one
Go ahead,
thing
Christine.
change. So I, for one, I did not read this AUL document thoroughly. But nor am I really qualified to know if it's appropriate or accurate or has issues. So I guess my question would be, is there a way to add to this language that city staff has also reviewed and commented on the document? Because I would, like Kathy, I don't know as
We did review it, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
because
Prepared by
Sure.
Union Station Associates and reviewed by the city. You
Or
could
the
put it in
city
there.
staff.
Yeah,
Okay.
city staff, appropriate city staff.
Yeah,
That's a good catch, sure.
okay.
It's our land, we have to look at it. Our city's SRA's land.
Is that okay with the members, the way it is right now? Okay, see no objections, so I'll entertain a motion that we approve the Union Square AUL for this particular site. There a motion?
Motion to approve.
Who is that?
Courtney.
Courtney, okay. Is there a second?
I second a motion to approve.
All right, Christine Stone seconds, so roll call vote, Awana Bonney,
Yes.
Courtney Brunson,
Yes.
Ben Ewan Campen,
Yes.
William Gage,
Yes.
Patrick McCormick,
Yes.
Christine Stone,
Yes,
and myself, Phil Ercolini, have approved the indicated AUL, Union Square AUL for D2. Next item on the agenda, Winter Hill Urban Renewal Plan. And we have an update regarding the HLC approval for the SRA's acquisition of a portion of Somerville's assessors parcel 70-D-5.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and Tricia just dropped off, but Thank you to Tricia for answering those
Thank you,
questions.
Tricia.
So I'm going to start with an introduction to this. Let me again share my screen. Okay, so the next items on our agenda are pertaining to 299 Broadway, including an update from the state on the Redevelopment Authority's request to purchase the land that will become the Sewell Pocket Park, as well as a waiver to allow us to pay for the improvements up front. And then also returning to the land development agreement draft that was discussed last month. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we were joined this evening by Scott Lombardi, who is Vice President of Development. Scott, I apologize if I got that title incorrectly, but who works very closely on the 299 Broadway project. So I'll review some of the context from last week that we discussed. So as a reminder, the city received a $2.5 million MassWorks Infrastructure Program grant from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Economic Development to support civic space development at 299 Broadway. And for anyone unfamiliar with this project, we'll go into less detail this week, but this is a project that's helping meet many of the goals of the Winter Hill urban renewal area. Because of some of the constraints of the grant, staff had proposed a strategy for spending the grant by which the SRA would use the grant upfront to pay for both the land and the improvements that would become the future Sewell Pocket Park, so one of the civic spaces on the lot, and would then hold the land while the development team finished building the park before ultimately deeding the land to the city to hold in perpetuity as a public park. So it's a little bit unique of a scenario here. We explored a lot of different options, and just given various constraints around the grant and around procurement, this was kind of the best option forward. So just to kind of remind everyone the specific site we're talking about, you can see here in blue, well, first in pink, you can see the Winter Hill urban renewal area. In blue, you can see the 299 Broadway redevelopment, which is the majority of the Winter Hill urban renewal area. And then in green, you can specifically the parcel that we were talking about. So the future Sewell Pocket Park, which is about 7,900 square feet, located along Sewell Street. So this will be both kind of a space for both residents of these buildings and the wider neighborhood to use. And it's also part of a larger kind of civic space connection from Sewell Street to Broadway. So it creates kind of another connection through the block. So just to remind, the benefits of the structure we discussed is that it allows us to spend the full MassWorks grant to support the project. So it allows us to really kind of get that full oomph of the grant. It also achieves efficiencies by having the 299 Broadway team build out the space, and ultimately it achieves public ownership of that civic space, which was not previously assured, but had been really a priority of the ward councilor. And Councilor Klingon joined us last month at the SRA meeting to talk with SRA members and show support for the project. And then the SRA's involvement also, as I mentioned, kind of simplifies the procurement process for the project, given that this occurs within an urban renewal area. So at the last meeting, SRA members voted to send a letter to the state's Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, or HLC, which approves urban renewal acquisitions. And that letter sought to first just approve the acquisition of the civic space. So HLC needs to approve any acquisitions within an urban renewal area. And then we had also requested a waiver from urban renewal regulations. The regulations specifically state that when doing an acquisition, there must be 2 appraisals, and you're not supposed to pay higher than the higher of those 2 appraisals. In this case, because the MassWorks grant was for a larger amount and we wanted to pay upfront for the improvements that will be made to the land, we had requested a waiver to be able to pay more than the higher appraisal. And the state responded last week approving both of those requests. So prior to the meeting, I shared the letter back from HLC, which approved the acquisition and the waiver request. So that is great news for moving forward with this project. I did want to walk through some next steps before we kind of get more into talking about the LDA, specifically the land development agreement. So prior to actually moving forward with the acquisition, there are several administrative steps that needs to be completed. The first is that we are looking for the SRA to enter into a land development agreement. So we reviewed some of that language at the last meeting. The goal is to hopefully kind of approve and finalize that language this evening. And so this would be between the Redevelopment Authority and the 299 Broadway development team, outlining responsibilities for redeveloping the site. This also, the kind of the structure of this agreement is also what is meant to help provide confidence for paying for the improvements up front and then still ensuring that the work is completed within the grant timeline. Second, the SRA will need to enter into kind of a simple memorandum of understanding between the SRA and the city. And this is going to be essentially just approving the city to pay for the acquisition. This is kind of similar to in December when we were having the conversation about 90 Washington Street. There was a vote that was taken to essentially just allow the city to pay on the SRA's behalf. This MOU will kind of similarly capture that structure. I'm kind of just previewing some of the documents that will come in front of you in the coming months. We'll then also need to review a draft easement. And so this is referenced in the draft LDA language that was shared, but given that the SRA will own the site while the development team is finishing the improvements, there needs to be an easement for access to that space and a few other things that are outlined in the LDA. And then lastly, we'll also at some point, likely next month, need to review a draft of the deed transfer itself. So this is kind of just to preview some of the language that's going to be coming in front of you. For today, we are just focusing on the land development agreement. This is definitely the largest of these documents. This is really the bulk of this kind of requires its own attention. Some of these other agreements are going to be coming in front of you likely at the June meeting, just so that you have time to look at that language and give any feedback. Okay. Before we get into discussing the land development agreement, I just want to stop at that point. I think there were some members who were not here last time, so I just also want to take a second to, if there are any questions before we get into the land development agreement or about kind of the state approval, just take a second to answer those. If there are no questions, that is also okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get into talking about the land development agreement. So at our last meeting, we had shared the language of the agreement up front. SRA members had reviewed that draft and given some initial comments. So based on those comments, Kathy and I went back to the development team, discussed updates, which I can talk through a bit now. Let me actually, well, I guess rather than bringing up the actual specific language, unless there end up being specific questions about that language, I'll just kind of walk through some of the main ones. So Member Stone had brought up a request to kind of add more detail around the development partnership, given that there are kind of multiple levels of this joint partnership between Mark Development, Samuels and Associates, Beacon Communities, and Rise Together. So more detail was added within the draft agreement that was shared tonight on the structure of that partnership. And I'll note also there was language that had initially been included, which remains in the document, which is essentially saying that if there are any changes to the structure of that agreement, there is a requirement for the development partnership to give that update to the SRA. And really, this is just about making sure we always know who we are talking to, who is responsible for completing this project. The second piece is that we had requested initially the language in the draft document had given 20 days for providing an estoppel certificate if requested by the development team, showing that the project, essentially the team was in good standing. Member Stone noted that this could be potentially less than the time between SRA meetings. So to make sure that we always have time to host an SRA meeting to actually get feedback and a vote on that estoppel certificate, we increased that time from 20 days to 45 days. So that change was made. And then the final piece of this, and kind of the biggest update and kind of the biggest concern that was raised last time by members, was around sort of what is the assurance that this work is completed within the timing that is stated in this agreement. So currently the agreement states that in May of 2027, which is around the expected time that this work will be complete, any work that is remaining, the development team is required to post a bond or a letter of credit for the remaining value of the work to really ensure that they complete the work. And the idea is also that that bond or letter of credit exists if for any reason city staff needed to take over completing that project, which is in no way the intention of the city or the development partnership, but it's just to have that security. And so concern was raised that there needed to be a stronger assurance. So when we spoke with the development team, they had recommended or suggested increasing that bond, that buffer essentially. So rather than being a 100% bond for the remaining value of the work, they added language for 130% of the remaining value of the work. So that both adds kind of more confidence in the fact that the work would be done, but the idea also being, again, if for any reason the work needed to be taken over, it provides that buffer for administrative work that needs to be done. So staff feel confident in these updates to the agreement, but obviously want to bring these back to the SRA, hear any other comments that might still exist on the agreement, hear if the changes that were made feel like they sufficiently address the concerns that were brought up. And if there are any questions just in general about the project, the timeline, that's what Scott Lombardi is here to also be able to answer.
Ben, I have a question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to throw any monkey wrench into this issue, but I'm surprised that it didn't come up in the last meeting. I didn't address it, and maybe it was answered, I'm not sure. But it was indicated that the site is going to be a laydown area for the development of the construction. Is there anything there that precludes them laying down, what, in essence, when they say laydown area, what types of materials would they be laying down? Would there be anything that could create an environmental issue if they were to put, I don't know, equipment there or gasoline or anything like that? Is there anything that protects the SRA and the city from that happening?
Yeah, Scott, I'm going to hand it to you in a second to kind of address any initial response to that. One thing I will note is that the easement language has not yet been finalized. So the LDA essentially says that we will enter into an easement agreement, which allows for use of the space as construction laydown when it is owned by the SRA. And if there are kind of particular concerns like that, we can aim to reflect them in the language of that easement. We also, I think I've touched on this quickly in the past, either at the last meeting or when I did an earlier description of the project. But we've talked about kind of having an LSP that the city has on call. Just kind of, again, we feel quite confident in the environmental elements of this project, but just kind of doing that separate review to just give the SRA confidence. We've also talked about including that in the process.
Okay, that's the existing conditions. But my concern is in the future, if they're using this area as a laydown, a site, what does that mean? And I understand what you just said, so maybe we can address that later, but just
So
something to keep.
Part of what an LSP can also provide is just kind of confidence in that whatever steps were taken in actually producing that final park, that there was kind of no concern that would have been introduced in that process. But Scott, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that description.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think you did a great job, and thank you, Mr. Chair and SRA members, for allowing me to join tonight. So I think you nailed it. I think that we'll have pretty specific language in the easement agreement. There are several sub easements that are anticipated as being part of that larger easement agreement. One of them being for actual construction of the improvements and how that happens, and then the other one is, I guess, the staging / laydown area that you mentioned. It's more of a it's an area for construction trailers for access in and out, and for material storage that could definitely be further specified in the language of an easement agreement. I fully expect that it would be. So, and similar to how we would handle and store and manage materials anywhere else on the larger site, we wouldn't want our contractor doing anything that would potentially present a future environmental issue. So Ben, I would just imagine that when we start working on that easement this month, that it would be fairly specific as to what that staging / laydown area would be used for. And it'll probably always would be captured within our construction management plan that the city would have to weigh in on too.
Thanks, Scott. Any questions from members relative to what's been discussed so far? Christine?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everybody Scott and Ben and Catherine, for the changes to the document, and addressing the concerns that the SRA board members raised last month in our meeting. I do have one comment on those comments, if I may. And so the easiest, well, rather than pulling up the language in the document, I'll try to continue Ben's approach, which is to just speak about it generally, and it relates to the bond and posting of the bond. I don't have any problems with the 130%, but since I'm a math person, I always like think of things in formulas. And so when you look at the language, that 130% of unfinished improvements is not defined. And my suggestion is that somehow we define cost in some way in the original document, understanding that by whenever that date is, May 1st, 2027, the bond amount would be based on the unfinished improvements, but at least somehow agree as to what that number might be, either now or later. I do recall in our last meeting, we looked at some budget. I don't know if it's an exhibit to this agreement, but there was, Ben, you had shared with us like a schedule of costs. Maybe it was an estimate, Scott, from one of your contractors. And so if that's all you have right now, which you might, that may be all you have, it would be, what the unfinished costs of this, anticipated budget or something like that, or that the parties agree at the time of the bond posting of what that amount of what 100% equals. And then the bond could be based on the 130% of that number. So either
Right.
define a number now, which I know is a little bit difficult because it's really about unfinished improvements, or agree to define it later.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member
And
Stone
Ben-
and Kathy, please step in if I misspeak on this. One thing I do want to note is that similar language, although it's not 130% buffer, it's just 100% bond or letter of credit, exists within the conditions from the comprehensive permit for this project. So there is kind of like, even outside of the SRA dealings with this project, the city
Yeah.
has a requirement that if building B, so one of the buildings on the project, is going to receive its final certificate of occupancy without the civic space being complete, it can do so by posting a bond for the remaining value of the work. And so that is something that the city has a process for, essentially. Generally, there's like an independent cost estimate, and then that is used in issuing the bond. So we have a process that we generally feel confident about, and that we're going to need to meet that standard regardless for a condition of the comprehensive permit. Kathy, I don't know if there's any detail you want to add on that.
Well, I was going to, Mr. Chair, I was going to add that we can certainly put language here to state that intention, that we determine what the cost of the remaining work will be at the time that the bond's going to be posted or something like that. But that is the process that we follow, because we've done it in other projects, and engineering PSUF have eyes on it. They verify the numbers unless we get an independent, pay for an independent cost estimate if we need one. But we do get eyes on it, and we do make sure that it's in the right amount.
Okay, that sounds great. It's just that all sounds wonderful, and if we can somehow reference that process and in the agreement, that would be great.
Any other catches, anything, any other comments? Okay, seeing none. So you want to revise that section to include your language, Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, Ben, I don't know if they were voting on the document. If they're voting on the document tonight, and just say if you want to give us authority to add language that will capture that, or how you'd like to handle that, Mr. Chair or members.
Ben?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I had prepared some draft vote language that we can tweak a little bit here. But I would really like to encourage, if there are no other concerns about this, and if we feel like that's something that that staff can address, that we vote to kind of with those final changes rather than tweaking the language live, like with those final changes to approve the language of the document. And that way we're able to do some final back and forth with Scott's team to kind of come to a final agreement. And then as long as it's within kind of the parameters of what staff understand the SRA is comfortable with, we can then still move forward with executing the document. And I just encourage that, just kind of given given how close really the project team is to their financial closing and hoping to kind of start construction on the project, that allows us to execute that agreement and move forward with some of the other administrative items that we referenced.
I think we can do that if the members have no objections to that. Okay, I see none, so I'll entertain a motion to vote to approve the updated LDL language and execute the agreement. Is there a motion?
Motion to
Patrick
approve
McCom-
what you said, Phil.
I'm sorry. Patrick McCormick makes a motion. Is there a second? I think Courtney.
Seconded to whatever you said, Phil.
Okay, then we'll do a roll call vote. Awana Bonnie,
Yes.
Courtney Brunson,
Yes.
then Ewan Campen.
He
Councilor
may
Ewan
have-
Kempen
He
left,
had
had to leave the
to
meeting.
At
He's left the
6:30.
meeting. Okay, William Gage,
Yes.
Patrick McCormick, Christine
Yes.
Stone. I
So,
heard Patrick, so Christine,
so how, I'm sorry, so Ben, you're going to not tweak this vote language, but
We can
No,
tweak
it's
the,
a,
you can tweak the vote language.
yeah.
Yeah,
through
let's just
Chair
put
Member
something
Stone.
quick in
My
there.
intention was to
Yeah.
do so initially, and then as we started
Yeah,
moving
then we,
forward, I knew the intention, but I understand that we
That's
want to
all right.
reflect it accurately. So saying here to approve the language of the land development agreement between the SRA and 299 Broadway property owner.
to be amended as directed by the SRA.
yeah.
The amended
When
as
I was suggesting the
May
motion, I was
May 13th.
incorporating, updating the LDL language being tonight's update, so.
Very fair.
Maybe I was
So
unclear.
To add the actual cost of
Yes,
remaining repairs at the time.
process by which the parties agree on cost, on
Yeah.
unfinished improvement, the cost of unfinished improvements at the time the bond is posted or is needed to be posted.
Yeah.
Because, right, we don't even know that bond is necessary.
No.
They may complete improvements by May 1st, 2027.
all right, I'm just going to read this out. So asking the chair to request a motion in a second to approve the language of the land development agreement between the Somerville Redevelopment Authority and 299 Broadway Property Owner LLC as presented at the SRA's May 13th, 2025 general meeting to be amended by staff as directed by the SRA to add the process for determining the actual cost of remaining improvements of the future Sewell Pocket Park at the time of potential bond issuance, and authorize Phil Ercolini as chair of the SRA to sign and execute the LDA. Okay.
that looked fine, ready for approval, so I'll entertain a motion then to approve this LDL language and execute the agreement.
I motion to approve.
All right, Christine makes a motion to approve, there's a second.
Seconded from Christine.
Courtney Brunson seconds, roll call vote, Awana Bonnie,
Yes.
Courtney Brunson,
Yes.
then Ewan Campen has left the meeting, William Gage,
Yes.
Patrick McCormick,
Yes.
Christine Stone,
Yes.
and myself, Phil Ercolini, have voted to approve. The next item on the agenda is 90 Washington Street Demonstration Project Plan and a request to go into executive session to discuss the value of the property at 90 Washington Street. And Catherine, what I'd like to do is, if I could, item number 6, I'd like to go out of order here. Item number 6, I have no items that have been anticipated by the chair. I don't know if there are any members who want to bring up anything at this point in time. If not, can I, rather than go into executive session and come out again and go into public session, Catherine, can we just vote to approve to go into executive session with the proviso that we not go into public session, or do we have
I
to?
I think the town clerk has said otherwise, that the preferred practice, at least at this point in time, is to come back into open session after the executive session is adjourned. But otherwise I would have been sympathetic to that approach.
Okay, all right, well, I'll entertain a motion that we go into executive session to discuss 90 Washington Street. Is there a motion? Christine makes a motion. Is there a second?
Executive Session.
Seconded.
Awanda Bonnie seconds, roll call vote.
Yes.
Awanda.
Yes.
We're really getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, Ben Campion has left the meeting. William Gage,
Yes.
Patrick McCormick,
Yes,
Christine Stone,
Yes.
myself, Phil Ercolini, have voted to move into executive session with the proviso that we will reopen in public session at the conclusion of that. All right, good luck, see if we can get there. Bill, you and I, we're always the troublemakers.
I know.
Okay. All
We'll
right,
make
bye.
the
Ben,
attempt.
if you could send over the, thing.
So the link should have been in the initial email with the agenda and everything. It's in
Perfect.
sort of the second chunk of the email. If you have any issues finding it though, please just text me.
No, meeting link. I got it. You put it there. Thank you, Ben.
Oh, it'll take me a minute. I have to go through identification with Xfinity. I don't know why that is always. I can't minimize it, you know what I mean? So I have to start the whole process again. Okay, bye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bye, Phil. Bill, can I ask that you leave this meeting and then if you need any help, you can call me and we can walk through it.
All right, I thought I had, but evidently I have not.
It's okay.
Okay, wait a minute.
So there should be, I believe, under either in your bar, there should be an option to leave. It might be under more.
Well, I'm already on Teams.
First, I need you to leave the Zoom meeting.
Well, all right. All right, wait a minute. And how do I get out of it?
So either in I apologize, I don't know exactly what it looks like on your screen, but there should be like a bar of different options and one should be leave meeting or some similar language. It might look like a person walking out a door.
No.
So what are the different options that you see in the bottom?
All right, well, I've got to get out of my Microsoft Teams. So let me get out of that first.
So you shouldn't need to exit Teams to exit Zoom.
All right, I did. All right, so I guess the question is how do I get out of this one? Wait a minute.
So in the bar of different options,
Wait a minute. Maybe if I do this, does that get me out?
I still see you here with me. I am going to remove you from the meeting and it will mean that you cannot re-enter later, but we will have
Okay.
quorum to vote to end. And at that point, there will be no substantive items. We'll just be voting to end. But
All
I just
right,
want
that's
to
fine
tell you
then.
up front. Okay. So let me,
Sorry about that,
it's okay,
but
that happens.
I don't see anything here.
All right, I'm going to remove you, but I'll see you on the team side.
Yep.
Okay. I think these are all the members who will be returning.
All right.
So whenever you would like to
Okay.
take the next
We
item.
are in open session, so the next item on the agenda is any items not reasonably anticipated by the chair. There are none. Then the next next item on the agenda is a request for a meeting adjournment, so I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn this meeting until June. So any member? Yes, Patrick McCormick makes a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Awana Bonnie seconds, roll call vote. Awana Bonnie,
Yes.
Whitney Brunson,
Yes.
Manuel Camp has left the meeting. William Gage has left the meeting. Patrick McCormick,
Yes.
Christine Stone has left the meeting, and myself, Phil Ercolini. We did have a quorum and we adjourn. So we'll see each other in June.
Thank you.
Thanks so much,
Hey,
Ben,
have a
for
good
all
one.
your
Thank
work
you.
on
Thank
this.
you.
Bye. Thank you, Ben.
And thanks.
everyone.
Take care, everybody.